Even though that he's the best and everybody thinks that he's unbeatable, I say he's not unbeatable, he's beatable.
Even when the world looked at him as the best, when fans and experts alike thought he was completely unbeatable, Novak Djokovic never bought into that myth. He always believed every champion could be beaten, even legends like Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, who seemed untouchable at the height of their dominance. And that belief wasn't arrogance, it was hunger. It was the fire that drove him from being the young underdog who dared to say out loud that he would conquer them into the greatest player the sport has ever seen. Because while others accepted the aura of invincibility around Roger and Rafa, Djokovic refused. He told himself and the world that nobody is unbeatable, and then he went out and proved it.
Yeah, that wasn't going to say it.
When Roger and Rafa were dominating at the start of their career, everybody thought they were unbeatable. I always tell the story of young Novak coming up and thinking and saying actually out loud, he's going to beat those two guys and be the best. And
it made me more hungry to really, particularly win.
When Novak Djokovic first stepped onto the big stage, the tennis world was already split between two giants. Federer with his elegance and precision, Nadal with his relentless power and unmatched clay dominance. Both of them were creating an aura that no one dared to challenge. Players lined up and tried, but deep down, most accepted defeat before even walking onto the court. Yet Djokovic was different. He didn't just show up to participate, he showed up convinced that he could break through the impossible. And from his earliest matches, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who wasn't there to admire Federer and Nadal, but to dethrone them. He spoke it out loud. He said he would beat them. He said he would become the best. And while everyone rolled their eyes or laughed it off, he never flinched. That belief was his weapon, and it planted the seed for what would become one of the greatest tennis rivalries in history.
I realized today that I don't need to play anything special. I don't need to play anything special. Everybody thinks, Nadal, for sure, he's the best on this surface, but he's not unbeatable, that's for sure. I think I could win today. I have to say that even though that he's the best and everybody thinks that he's unbeatable, I say he's not unbeatable.
In the mid-2000s, Rafael Nadal wasn't just winning on clay, he was destroying everyone who dared to face him. His dominance was so overwhelming that the media painted him as a machine, a player who simply could not be beaten on the red dirt of Roland Garros. Opponents stepped onto that court already knowing the outcome. Yet, Djokovic didn't see an unbeatable wall, he saw a challenge. And in 2006, after facing Nadal in Paris, he stood in front of the press and said something that shocked everyone. He admitted Nadal was the best on clay, but insisted he was not untouchable. Novak declared that even though the world believed Rafa could not be beaten, he believed he could. And that bold statement showed the difference between Djokovic and every other player of his generation. While others accepted Nadal's aura, Djokovic refused to bow. He wanted the fight, he wanted the pain, and he wanted to prove that no champion, no matter how dominant, was beyond reach. That press conference wasn't just words, it was a declaration of intent. A warning shot to the tennis world that this young Serbian wasn't afraid of the impossible. What separated Djokovic from the rest of the field wasn't just talent or athleticism, it was mindset. When others looked at Federer and Nadal, they saw legends who could not be touched. Djokovic saw human beings. He told himself that if they could bleed, he could make them bleed. If they could win, he could find a way to win too. This belief didn't come from coaches or commentators telling him he was special. It came from deep inside, from an inner confidence that most players never develop. He wasn't aiming to sneak one win here and there. He was aiming to rewrite the hierarchy of tennis itself. And slowly, that belief began to manifest on the court. He pushed rallies longer. He returned serves that should have been winners. He forced the two greatest champions of the era into battles they weren't used to. He showed the world that he would not crack mentally, that while Federer's artistry and Nadal's ferocity could intimidate others, they would not intimidate him. And by standing tall when everyone expected him to bow, Novak Djokovic began carving out the path that would turn him from the underdog into the man who would eventually dominate them both. As Djokovic grew into his prime, one truth became clear to everyone in the game. His greatest weapon wasn't his forehand or his backhand, it wasn't his serve or even his movement, it was his mind. He became the master of mental warfare, the player who could outlast you not only in rallies but in belief. Rivals admitted it again and again. They said his mindset was unshakable, that when the pressure rose and the crowd roared, he didn't collapse, he sharpened. When most players tightened up, Novak thrived. He fed off the tension, he embraced the noise, and that's why he kept climbing. Because while Federer's elegance and Nadal's grit built their legacies, it was Djokovic's refusal to break mentally that made him so dangerous. He turned matches into battles of will, and more often than not, his opponents realized they simply couldn't keep up. He made the impossible look possible because in his mind, defeat was never an option. It was just another challenge to overcome. When it came to Nadal on clay, the challenge was unlike anything else in sports. Roland Garros was Rafa's kingdom, a fortress where even the greatest players in history were humbled. Yet Djokovic refused to surrender to the myth. Their battles on the red dirt became legendary. Novak was one of the few who could stand toe-to-toe with Nadal in those marathon rallies, sliding across the baseline, retrieving impossible shots, and then counterattacking with precision. Every point felt like a war. The crowd believed Rafa was untouchable, but Djokovic kept proving he could drag him into the trenches and fight him shot for shot. Their matches weren't just physical, they were psychological duels where Novak's endurance and belief collided with Rafa's raw intensity. And in those moments, Djokovic showed the world that the aura of invincibility surrounding Nadal could be pierced even on the clay courts of Paris that were once considered sacred ground for only one man. And by doing that, he didn't just challenge Nadal's reign, he changed the narrative of tennis forever. The ultimate proof of Djokovic's resilience came in Melbourne in 2012 when he faced Nadal in the longest Grand Slam final in tennis history. Nearly 6 hours of brutal, punishing rallies that pushed both men past the limits of human endurance. Point after point, they traded blows, their bodies screaming for relief, yet neither willing to give in. The crowd witnessed a match that felt less like tennis and more like a test of survival. By the time Djokovic finally sealed victory in the fifth set, his legs were trembling, Nadal's body was shaking, and both of them were so spent that during the trophy ceremony, they had to be given chairs just to remain standing. Djokovic peeled off his socks in the locker room to find blood from the blisters covering his feet. But what defined that night wasn't just the pain, it was the statement. Novak had shown that he could go through hell and still find a way to win. He had proven that his mind and body could withstand the most punishing battle tennis could offer. And from that moment on, every opponent knew they weren't just facing a champion, they were facing a warrior who simply would not break. As Djokovic's career evolved, he became more than just the ultimate defender. He transformed into a player who could turn defense into offense in the blink of an eye. Rivals described it like facing a wall that not only sent everything back, but suddenly punched back harder. His return of serve became the most feared in the game, taking the ball early, neutralizing power, and instantly flipping rallies in his favor. But what made him terrifying was his ability to attack when you least expected it. One moment you thought you had him pinned behind the baseline, the next he opened the court with a forehand cross or ripped a backhand down the line that left opponents stunned. He combined Murray's stretching reach with Agassi's offensive return instincts, creating a blend no one else possessed. And players admitted it was suffocating. They said to win a point against Djokovic, you had to hit not one winner, not two, but 5 or 6 perfect shots in a row. And even then, he might still find a way to turn it around. This balance of lockdown defense and sudden, lethal offense made him not only the most complete player of his era, but arguably the most complete player the sport has ever seen. By the time Djokovic had carved his name alongside Federer and Nadal, it was clear that their rivalries weren't just about trophies, they were about history. Every time Novak stepped on court against them, the world stopped. Fans knew they were watching something that would be remembered for decades. Their battles weren't just contests of skill, but epic sagas of endurance, pride, and legacy. And through those wars, Djokovic proved he wasn't the outsider anymore. He was the equal and often the conqueror. He took the dominance of Federer's artistry and Nadal's grit and forced them to raise their games higher than ever before. Together, they created the golden age of tennis, but Novak's belief, his willingness to stare down the aura of invincibility, pushed the sport to new heights. He didn't just collect titles, he redefined what greatness looks like. showing that perfection is not a gift but a relentless pursuit, and in the process, he turned himself from the hungry underdog who dared to dream into the player many now call the greatest of all time. Novak Djokovic's story is not just about winning titles, it's about rewriting the very idea of what's possible in tennis. He stepped into a world ruled by Federer and Nadal, a world where most players bowed before their aura, and he refused. He declared they were not unbeatable, and then went out and proved it. Time and again, he fought through pain, silence, and doubt, turning every setback into fuel, every criticism into motivation. He battled Nadal on clay until the impossible became reality. He faced Federer on the biggest stages and refused to blink, and he stood tall long after others faded. What makes him extraordinary isn't just his technique or his records, it's the unbreakable mindset that carried him from a boy with a dream to the man who bent an entire sport to his will. Love him or hate him, respect him or resist him, one truth remains undeniable. Novak Djokovic didn't just play tennis, he redefined it, and his legacy will echo far beyond the court, reminding the world that no champion, no dynasty, no legend is ever truly unbeatable.